Before we get going, I'm really pleased to let you know that we've been awarded a small grant, a Movement for Good grant by the Benefat Group, specifically to develop the Drug Education Forum. We really need to get this up and going as a independent, self-sustaining, self-financing body of some sort. It'd be some sort of non-profit organisation. At the moment, it's being run entirely by a very dedicated, very committed group of already incredibly busy people. And there is so much more. Obviously, that's not sustainable in itself. And there's so much more that the Drug Education Forum can do if we're able to get it set up in such a way that it's able to sustain itself and also have some kind of developmental development built into that as well. So we're looking at what that will look like. The funding will enable us to pay for some staff time to kind of resource that over the coming year. And the plan is that we'll launch that as its own organisation, if you like. At the moment, we're kind of hosting it at the DSM Foundation, but the plan is that we're able to launch that for the next financial year. And in the meantime, the steering group is working on what the plan for that might look like. We're looking at a membership model, because really that's the only kind of model that we think is probably going to be realistic in terms of having an income stream that means that we can keep doing stuff and keep growing, hopefully, as well. But we'd be really interested in your feedback and insights. Paul's going to close the session. He'll say a little bit more about this, and also share a link. Ivan will be sharing a link to a survey, not only for feedback about this, but also for your ideas and your thoughts about that. So different kind of membership fee rates and models, and ideas as well for different products and services that you think the Drug Education Forum could valuably provide. Any experience that you've got of setting up similar organisations and bodies or being involved in them, anything that you think that would be useful to learn from that. So there'll be a little bit more on that at the end, but again, as we go along, any comments, any ideas, please do put anything useful in the chat. So that's the end of my little bit of preamble. So I'm going to hand over to Helena now, and we're going to crack on with our keynotes. Not keynotes, spotlights.
Spotlights. Good
Keynote
afternoon,
spotlight.
Everybody. I'm Helena Connie-Bear, and I'm the CEO of the Talk About Trust. And it's my job my pleasure, I should say, to introduce everybody this afternoon. So first of all, a huge pleasure to introduce Hannah Head from Students Organising for Sustainability, SOS-UK. It's a student-led charity who puts students at the forefront of change. Very importantly, they're spearheading harm reduction approaches to drugs on university campuses across the UK. And indeed, it's Student Drug and Alcohol Awareness Week this week, so very appropriate we have this talk today. So thank you, Hannah, who's talking on harm reduction on campus.
Amazing. Hopefully you guys can all see a nice blue screen right now. I've just realised that, Jason, our colour matches the background of where you're sitting absolutely perfectly. Amazing. Thank you all. So I'm just going to give a really quick run through of just some of the bits and bobs we've been seeing happening on university campuses. And as mentioned, this is Student Drug and Alcohol Awareness Week, so perfectly timed. So just to introduce SOS-UK and myself, I'm in the wellbeing team and I'm a project manager. And as kind of already mentioned, we're a youth-led charity. We run projects to support campuses in work around drug and alcohol. We run an annual survey, which actually opened yesterday. We host training and an annual conference. And we also run the Student Drug and Alcohol Awareness Week. So this is just the work we do in the wellbeing team. I felt like that was the most relevant for today. But we do a whole host of other amazing youth-led work. So please do feel free to check out our website, especially if you're interested in sustainability as well. I just wanted to spotlight a few key bits of research. So we run our annual survey. So I'm just pulling out a few of the key stats around the kind of student drug use picture. Our website has huge amounts of information in the full research reports from these, and alcohol is included in that today. But as it's the Drugs Education Forum, I focused on just a key bits around student drug use. So when we look at university students, one of the questions that we ask them is kind of how frequently they use drugs. And we saw 78% of students last year saying that they do not currently use drugs. This does include those who have used drugs in the past. And then we split the rest of the kind of participant groups into currently using drugs and having used drugs while at university. This is kind of comparatively pitched against some other pieces of work as well, in terms of being kind of aligned with the amount of young people using drugs. It varies depending on which other sources and reports you look at. I think some reports, the ONS data says kind of 9.5% of people aged 17.6% of people aged 16 to 24 report using drugs at any point, whereas there are kind of older reports as well, like the Taking the Hit report, which said kind of 56% of students use drugs. So quite a varying statistic, but this has been quite consistent in our surveys over the last few years. When we move to kind of think about the impact of students using drugs, obviously the motivations remain quite similar to the general population, and I'm sure people in the room kind of have different experiences and understanding of the motivations behind drug use. That kind of maps onto student populations as well. But the specific impacts that we see are really interesting. I'm not going to read all of these out. I'm hoping you can see them big enough on the screen to have a little look. So these are the reported impacts that students who use drugs kind of said that they experience as a result of their drug use. And I just wanted to note that it's interesting here, there are a range of positive and negative kind of experiences and impacts here, and this is really important, especially under that health category, looking at kind of the impacts on students' mental health, which has been a huge piece of work across the sector over the last few years. As I mentioned, we run a couple of different projects at SOS in the wellbeing team. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the drug and alcohol impact programme. So this is the project that I manage along with Tracy, who I've seen sharing some links in the chat. And this project is an accreditation scheme, basically, where we look to support universities and students' unions to work in partnership across their whole campus, and to kind of bring harm reduction onto campus. We've been running this programme since 2020, and it previously existed as alcohol impact. And we had kind of students' unions and universities saying, we really need support around student drug use as well. We don't know, what we should be saying, what we should be doing. So we updated the programme to include drugs in that as well. On the screen, you can see the 15 campuses that we work with at the moment. And you'll also notice that for each of them, it's the university and the students' union. As I said, we kind of push this work to be done in partnership because we feel like it's really, really important that that student voice piece is considered and that this is kind of across the entire institution as well. What this kind of looks like in practice has been the redevelopment of policies, so moving away from the more traditionally zero tolerance and punitive approaches to student drug use, and kind of adapting those to support students and embedding wellbeing within the centre of that. We've also seen the creation of new support on campus, which has kind of ranged from better staff training or new and updated staff training in partnership with a whole host of organisations. At the University of West England, we have a specialist drug and alcohol practitioner actually employed in-house. And we've seen kind of work on that support pathway as well. So working kind of in partnership with external services and treatment providers as well. We've seen improved communications on harm reduction, so focusing on the messaging that students receive from their universities and students' unions. And we've seen a focus on getting students really involved in shaping this work as well. And then the final thing there, just to lead me on to my next slide, is we've seen better data being captured. So interventions that are designed by each of these institutions and partnerships is targeted towards the students who kind of need it. So for example, potentially a specific cohort of students, a specific course may need specific support and advice around alcohol use, for example, so that those interventions can be targeted to that group. As I said, this is an accreditation scheme, so we get our partnerships to kind of go through an audit process, and as part of that, they have to report impacts to us. And I just wanted to share a snapshot of some of the important impacts that we've seen on campus. So these were things that were submitted from partnerships who audited in the 2023-24 period, so the last academic year that's just gone. And I really wanted to flag the third one down. So over the 4-year period, one of our partnerships has seen a 62% reduction of students who feared judgment from the university if they sought support. And I'll mention it a little bit more in terms of where the UK report kind of stemmed from in a minute. But one of the kind of big pieces of work in this recently found that of students who had kind of accessed drug and alcohol support from their university, more than a third, so 37% of those students reported they feared consequences of coming forward and seeking that support. So it's kind of persistent across the sector that that's a real concern for students. So seeing this 62% reduction of students fearing that has been incredible. I'm not going to read the rest out because I don't want to kind of death by PowerPoint you, but I'm sure we can share the slides afterwards as well, and you can read all of these bits and bobs on our website as well. So I just mentioned the Universities UK report, and I just wanted to signpost this as a significant piece of work. It came out early this year at the beginning of July, just before the election. And I think it's really, really important for anyone who'd like more context to this area and understanding kind of the work that's being done. So we see a huge amount of barriers to adopting harm reduction on campus. And outside of our partnerships, there's been really different levels of engaging with this work over the last few years. Universities are hesitant in some cases to engage in work around kind of drugs, student drug use and harm reduction. And these are the kind of most commonly cited reasons for why adopting harm reduction is tough for universities. So we see concerns around reputational risk, we see a lack of knowledge, we see misunderstandings of the law and how the Misuse of Drugs Act relates to university. And we also see zero tolerance as the sector norm. That is slowly changing, and it's very, very exciting. So one of the reasons why that's slowly changing is outside of our work and all the amazing work that's been done over the last few years by different organisations is this report. So Enabling Student Health and Success, this is the Universities UK report, has many benefits for the entire higher education sector. It encourages a whole sector approach. It encourages well-being to be the kind of centre of that approach, and it also encourages further research. This then provides cover for universities in regards to that reputational risk if we encourage them to all move together towards the harm reduction approach. It provided legal information and knowledge on the issues around bringing harm reduction to campus, and it's working to shift the sector norm away from zero tolerance. So it's been really, really hopefully significant. The key thing I just want to flag for this, for the people who aren't likely to take it away and read it, is that the Universities UK report really recommended adopting a harm reduction approach specifically in relation to student drug use on campus. So this is quite a significant shift in the wider rhetoric around student drug use on campus. And Universities UK are a significant body as well. They are the kind of membership group for vice chancellors and senior leaders at universities. So this has the potential to have a huge amount of impact. So for any of you who are working with universities or looking to do that, please do have a little look at it. I'm aware I'm coming up to my time because I set a timer as well. But just in terms of how you guys can help us, you can encourage data gathering. I think the survey link, which is open currently, has been shared in the chat for students to respond to kind of gather that national picture. You can also assist with training if you work in a service with a local university, getting in conversation with them, joining their working groups, supporting them with things like naloxone provision on campus as well, and just ensuring that those support pathways are, fit for purpose and being advertised. Amazing. If there's any questions, please feel free to get in touch via email, or I'm sure there's been some in the chat that I haven't seen whilst I'm talking. Thank you.
Hannah, thank you so much for a really interesting synopsis there, and also for keeping to time. That's very, very impressive. I would like to introduce our second speaker, who is Jason Q, who is a former police officer who has designed and implemented drug diversion, which steers people away from arrest and interview when found in possession of controlled drugs. His work is evidencing the effectiveness of a public health approach over a punitive one across professional sectors such as policing, government and education. He's worked with UK Home Office and the Ministry of Justice, advising on new drug policy. He also delivers drug education and training. And his spotlight today is on a helpline for parents, carers and teachers. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helena, and welcome everybody. It's a privilege to be here, and thank you to Fiona especially for all of the epic work that you do for the Drug Education Forum. So thank you very much. As Helena mentioned, I am a former police officer. So the word, hopefully you can see my presentation slide in front of you. Can you see that, Helena? Brilliant, perfect, thank you. So in policing, of course, crime, punishment goes hand in hand. That creates an awful lot of fear for people reaching and seeking help, but it also creates a fear of the system and prevents people from seeking help for a loved one or a family member. So this spotlight is a few minutes to discuss what I've put together to hopefully fill a gap. So this certainly isn't to replicate any of the brilliant work out there. So for example, Talk to Frank have a helpline. It's in operation every afternoon, and thousands of people reach out for support and onward signposting. Whereas the Forward Trust have a brilliant web chat function now available from 9 till 5 every day, and somebody could contact an expert for help advice on housing, well-being, drugs, alcohol, homelessness, work or family-related incidents. It's there to help. This principally is a helpline to help those parents, carers and teachers in that really sticky situation where they fear a punitive outcome if they sought help, and it's to bridge that gap sensitively but also meaningfully. So this is what I aim to achieve. So this is my website. Oh, sorry, that's not work there. Sorry, this has gone wrong. Here we go. There we go. It's on Canva, and this is a whole new entity to me, so forgive me for that. I'm back on track. The helpline is principally for parents, carers and teachers. I often find, and I'm going to explain some case studies now, of some gaps in the system where people need help the most. So for parents, I've been contacted following Fiona's webinar, to parent, carers and teachers webinars, where parents have reached out where they fear speaking openly and publicly because their child may have had a touch point with organised crime. So whereas we know that every purchase of a drug is a contact point with the illicit market, and the illicit market is exploitative and harmful. So of course, there are arguments around regulation and stuff like that, but this is principally to help parents where their child is vulnerable to exploitation or vulnerable to further harm because of their contact with that illicit market. And that might be through debt, for example. In particular, this is where parents and carers are not aware of the national organisations such as the St Charles Trust or the Children's Society or Rescue and Response for any CSE or CCE related incidents. What I aim to do is to help reassure the parent about the correct approach. Now, often, and I would say too often, parents are very reluctant to contact police. Because of that punitive element where they fear they're going to compromise their child's contact point with the police or be arrested, and they fear that punitive approach. Obviously, there is a lot to be done around this, but we will get there in the end. So where I bridge that gap is that parents can contact me confidentially, and I will help navigate that complex situation. I'm experienced with safeguarding, I'm experienced with mitigating risk, and I'm experienced about taking responsibility for that risk and referring an individual to the appropriate support at the right time. Other case studies have included where a child is caught up within the justice system but has a co-occurring condition such as ADHD, and actually the cause of the crime is actually because of the self-medication of perhaps amphetamine-based medication. And it's it's what is that child self-medicating, and they've never reached support or help for. So very, very quickly I'm able to point them in the direction of specialized help, and in that case from the Oasis partnership with Colin McGregor Patterson. So these things really do work, and it's about mitigating the punitive element. Another example is where teachers have faced situations where school children have been found in possession of drugs, and their policy is to exclude. Now, nationally, we exclude too many children from school for possession or use of drugs, and teachers are in a very sticky situation where the school policy, reputationally based more often than not, prevents any other outcome, when actually they know too well that education and support would provide a much more meaningful outcome. So I'm bridging that gap. I'm not intending to reinvent the wheel. I'm intending to help mitigate risk, safeguard, and very, very quickly, but confidentially, refer that individual to the right response, the right organisation, the right outcome for that individual. And I will do that confidentially. And I think that's really important. It's missing at the moment. I lead the Berkshire Combating Drugs Partnership. And again, the same messages come through time and time again, that bridging that gap between punitive and bridging the gap between a fear of reaching help. We need to overcome and combat that fear. You've heard in Hannah's presentation too about the fear of judgment and the fear of seeking help, and this is designed to mitigate and overcome that. So I'm moving on to the next slide. If this is of use, my ask to you is that this I provide this for free. This is pro bono. I am passionate about reducing harm. I am empathetic and compassionate, and I want to help. Please do scan the QR code that's in front of you now, hopefully on your screen, reach the helpline, and then advertise it on your websites. If it becomes too much, I'll seek support, but at the moment I have the capacity to help, and I want to help. So please do share that far and wide, add it to your websites, and let's start helping people bridge that gap where they fear a punitive outcome. And that's it from me. So short and sweet. It's about a help. It's a helpline to help, and that's all it is. No judgment, no stigma, no fear of a punitive outcome. I want to help. So any questions at all? Thank you. So I'll stop sharing that. Over to you, Helena.
Jason, I think we're doing questions at the end, if that's okay. I think we're saving up questions. But thank you so much for that. Really interesting. And I'm sure it's the case with many of us that actually reaching hard to reach parents is the hardest part of our job. So that's such a valuable tool. And thank you for sharing it. I'm now very pleased to introduce Ren Massetti. And he is Drug and Alcohol Training Coordinator for Essex, coordinating and developing training opportunities in the field of substance misuse. He's a qualified teacher, but also a trained addictive behaviour specialist. And his topic today, which I'm very interested to hear, is conversations in the dark, talking to online suppliers. Thank you, Ren. Thank you, Ren.
Thanks very much, Helena. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invite, Fiona. And it's fabulous to be here. Yeah, this is just a brief introduction to a paper that we wrote quite a while ago now, but we thought you might be interested in. It kind of explores the slightly murky waters of online supplying of illicit, illegal drugs. Sorry, I'll just get my presentation working. Very old NHS laptop, it's very slow. Right, so what this project was, or what the paper accounts, is a record of online interactions, discussions, if you like, between myself and two dark web suppliers or dealers, if you want to use that term, of mainly newer substances, new psychoactive substances. We called them S1 and S2 because they weren't very keen on giving me their real names for some reason. And you can see that one of them was contacted a long time ago, over quite a long period of time, and crucially before the Psychoactive Substances Act, which some of you will be aware of, and the second one was contacted after. So that's quite an interesting comparison to look at how the Act changed things, and I think it did have quite an influence on some of the products that they sold. More on that in a second. What I was interested in doing really was exploring that world really, and the assumption, the widely held assumption that all suppliers, all dealers are animals, really, that they are vicious, nasty, selfish, and that their one motivation, if they're not evil, is that they just want to make money. And I felt in my bones that that might be a slight oversimplification, but I thought, you know, I should explore it by contacting them and getting to know them, and also looking at how willing they would be to engage in some kind of harm reduction with their clients, with their customers. I think that's a really important bit to get, because we tend to know a lot, and there's a lot of research about people who use drugs, obviously, and there's also quite a lot out there about how we seek to control the drugs market. But I found it really difficult to find solid research on suppliers. You know, they do keep themselves to themselves, don't they? And yet certainly the online market is just exploding. It's a very popular way of buying drugs for pretty obvious reasons, really. You can just sit on your sofa and wait for it to come through your door. But you can see it's big business, folks, and likely to get bigger. And the model's changed, really, hasn't it? Because in the old days, you would go out and you would find your local dealer and make contact, and now you can just sit at home. And I see it a bit like Ocado. You know, they come and deliver to you. Actually, mainly it's the Royal Mail these days that will deliver your goods. Like I say, very few studies that I could find in the literature, and when they did sort of talk to dealers, they struggled to find the numbers. Even quite a large study at the University of Australia could only find 13, and they had to pay them to actually get involved in the study. So I didn't, you know, I thought I was doing quite well, just managing 2 of them. They're a very interesting and I think really crucial group to study, because they've got access to people no one else has got access to, haven't they? You know, people who are nowhere near treatment, you know, that they won't come into any agency. They're not interested in any sort of help. And these people know them. So I think they have a crucial sort of point of contact there that no one else has, really. And surprisingly, I was quite shocked in my naive way that both of them were, they were up for some harm reduction. You know, they didn't necessarily want to kill their customers. And they were also quite willing to engage with a health professional once they got to know me and trusted me and understood what the point of the project was. Just a bit of detail about them. They both had other jobs. One of them was a postie, which is a very useful job if you're going to be selling drugs online. And the other chap was a college teacher. It was actually a husband and wife team that were supplying. And it was quite obvious quite early on that they had preferred customers. They had preferred people that they would talk to, who they trusted. And there was that line between being a customer and being a friend was sort of blurred. I've got a Christmas card here from one of them. That's one of my proudest moments. So, you know, an interesting setup, and you'll find that in the literature, this sort of blurring of the lines. So they weren't necessarily just in it for the money. The first one, the one that I contacted quite a while ago, prior to the Psychoactive Substances Act, we would purchase them. Now, I hasten to add, this was in this was with the full knowledge and help of Suffolk Constabulary. So please don't phone the police. They knew all about it and actually helped me a lot in this work. But we purchased these products that he was selling and sent them to Tic Tac in London, which is a forensic testing sort of laboratory, if you like. And really fascinatingly, he was able to tell me what was in the products. And after we got them tested, he was always right. So he would purchase these things wholesale from China, and he would have certificates of purity from the lab that made it, and he would be able to tell you what was in it with some certainty. Now, post the Psychoactive Substances Act, that's all changed, as I'm sure you know, with the prevalence of drugs being mixed into other drugs. Some of which are very, very dangerous, very, very strong. Heroin and nitazines would be a good example. This is an example of the harm reduction that he put in place. It's a fascinating example, I think, because it's what is it? It's a job description, really, I think you would call it, but a job description for a guinea pig. So if he was selling research chemicals with, little research behind them, he was asking for testers, for people who would try these drugs and then report to him on the effects and some of the adverse effects, so that he could protect his larger customer base. Which I was surprised to see. Ability to work in strict confidence, very important. And also, after quite a big discussion with him, he agreed to put in harm reduction messages into his packaging. So when he would sell something to someone, he would pop in a little some harm reduction advice in there. A good example being the Viagra that he was selling. It was an analog of Viagra, and I managed to convince him to put a message in to say, don't mix it with poppers. There's quite a nasty little interaction that's possible when you put those two drugs together, I believe. So that's an example of some harm reduction that he put in. The second supplier was much more cautious. Remember, this is after the Psychoactive Substances Act. Now everything was much darker because everything really was illegal. And he did already post some harm reduction information on his website. And he would signpost to other harm reduction resources. That didn't make him any money. It just kept his customers safe, or safer. A good example of that was APCYP, a very little known substance, very niche, and he was selling it unaware really of how powerful this is. This is an incredibly powerful, long-lasting stimulant. This is his advert here for this particular product. We know this not from any literature. We know it's strong because there are some reviews online telling you how strong it is. This is an example of one review. This is a chap saying that after half a gram, a very small amount of powder, he had a 3-day bender with insane visuals and shadow people, etc., etc. So he was, I think, floridly psychotic for 3 days on half a gram. So very, very strong product. And after we mentioned that to him, he was happy to put in to his description of the product, this is a very strong stimulant, used with caution, starting with a tiny amount. That's going to cost him money, but he was, willing to do that. So, in conclusion, folks, the study did kind of show up that it is possible to communicate with some suppliers of illicit, illegal drugs, and that the assumption that all dealers are evil monsters is quite an oversimplification of the position. And actually there is a blurring of the lines sometimes between customer, supplier and friend. And importantly for us, I think, there's an opportunity here. Dealers do not necessarily want to kill their customers, and so there is an opportunity for anyone who wants to promote public health by engaging this cohort of people that we usually never speak to and never interact with and just see as the enemy. I think, folks, that's it. I think I'm done. Yeah, my email address is in the chat if you want to have a look at the original paper. Thanks very much, folks.
Gosh, very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Ren.
Thanks.
So last but not least, I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker, who is Adam Winstock, who is a consultant psychiatrist and an addiction medicine specialist, as well as being an honorary clinical professor at UCL, where he conducts academic research and teaches on addiction, public health and policy. He's also the CEO and founder of Staying Safer and of the Global Drug Survey, which is the world's largest survey on drug use and its effects, with an amazing over 900,000 participants. He's also developed and launched innovative digital tools such as the Drugs Meter app. So today, Adam is talking on From Zero Tolerance to Honest Communication, the changing landscape of student substance use, education and policy. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and what an amazing set of interesting conversations. And I love the fact someone's talking about the fact that dealers don't want to kind of kill their customers, which is completely true. And I think we are, yeah, there is definitely a missed opportunity of working with dealing networks to put out safe information. So I'm going to talk about issues of kind of young people transitioning to drug use and other vulnerabilities. And I do this on the back of having worked in this business for about 30 odd years. And when I started, it was HIV and kind of like the Balearic Islands putting out lots of MDMA and the government saying, ooh, you know, drugs kill. And we've kind of stuck with that rhetoric for quite a while. And over that time, I've worked in various environments and primarily treating people with serious drug problems. And now I spend an awful lot of time in prison, where I see lots of people who probably ended up there because risk factors for their drug use, such as neurodiversity and adverse childhood events, just were never spotted. And I guess what I've always felt is that people at risk simply aren't ever given access to honest information that allows them to make informed decisions about their own choices. And I think that's one of the issues with blanket harm reduction messages, is that people can kind of find ways to say that these aren't relevant to me. And I think the reality is that most people who use drugs don't run into problems. And the truth is most people who use drugs do so fairly moderately. And I think we have to help people do that, because the truth is most people just grow out of drugs as they get older. You know, they get jobs, they have other responsibilities, and that's even not accepting the fact that most people just don't use drugs. And most people don't use drugs because they're not interested. I'm not interested in cricket, tofu, heavy metal, socks with sandals, aubergine ballet, or Tottenham. It's about understanding that the choice to use drugs is not always related to disadvantage, poverty, and destruction. Saying that, of course, that those people who do use drugs, there is a minority, perhaps 10 or 15%, who develop problems. And that problem, that vulnerability, is embedded partly in their genes. So the heritability of dependence is probably 30 to 40% in your genes, but it's also around marginalization, vulnerability, and adverse childhood events. And those are things that we could identify earlier if we had the resources, instead of waiting till kids have dropped out of school and entered the criminal justice system. And it's unfortunate that the developing adolescent brain is primed for reward more so than making smart decisions. And the adolescent brain is also vulnerable to the disruptive effects of using drugs regularly. And ideally, the best drug policy in the world would be one that delayed the onset of drug use until your brain stopped developing, which is your mid-20s, which, as we know, is well past the point where people start using drugs. It would be lovely to reduce social inequality and reduce transgenerational deprivation and disadvantage. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But I think there's also an area that we tend to focus on, that while it is poverty and marginalization that definitely increases the risk, it's actually not just those people from disadvantaged backgrounds that use drugs. Actually, there was a study done a couple of years ago of school children, and the kind of group of school children that had the highest rate of drug use were girls at private boarding schools. So, you know, obviously, if you're going to have a drug problem, it's probably better to have money in the bank, but money doesn't stop you developing a drug problem. I think one of the things that helps people develop problems is not being able to talk about them. And we live in a society that is basically still zero tolerance, and that shuts down communication. And for young people who may have other problems and may be using drugs as a result of other life stresses, we don't want to shut that communication down. But that's what most kind of, I think, government drug strategies over the last, 40 years has done. And yeah, it's not useful.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Please tell me you can hear that.
No, can't hear. Adam. Oh, it's coming through now.
Excellent. Oh, is it coming through now?
It's buffering.
Is there music?
No, it's not. It's not, certainly not working for me.
Guys, I'd love to apologise. You would be amazed to think that we'd actually practiced this beforehand. And of course we had. Did I actually manage to kind of translate that into something that meaningfully worked? No, of course I haven't. But I just want to make sure that this is solely on me and not on the organisers of this event. So we're just going to skip that video because I was just too silly to get it to sort out. The other problem about going off to university and being a young person is that kind of your late teenage years are also the peak age for onset for the development of the most common mental health problems. By the age of 18, 40%, 50% of people who are going to develop a mental health problem have already got that diagnosis. And that coincides with the peak age of onset of drugs. And if you are using drugs and you have mental health issues and you try and see a psychiatrist, quite a lot of the time they're probably going to go, well, maybe it's not mental health, maybe it's drugs. The system is siloed and actually makes it difficult for people to get help. And the reason all of this is important is that there is a huge window of opportunity between people's first use and when they seek treatment. It's about a decade. And if we could raise people's awareness of their own risk, get them to understand why they use drugs, how drugs may impact on their mental health, and how we can all reorientate services, we might be able to help people change the trajectories of their drug use so they don't have to end up seeking treatment. That's the aim. But we've got to move beyond just pathologizing all drug use, and we've got to watch our language. So it shouldn't be alcohol, drugs and alcohol. It's alcohol and other drugs. It's not defining people as drug users or heroin addicts. It is not helpful that this becomes the defining characteristic. But if you are a young person and you are starting to use drugs early, the likelihood that there are other things going on is really important to recognize. If you simply label that young person as a drug user, you are going to miss out on the issues that really matter. So it's about being curious and not judgmental. And university is a great opportunity to spot this vulnerability and help and educate people. And that's because university is a risk time. People are transitioning away from kind of structures, environments that were supportive and familiar. They're suddenly put into a new place where there are new academic pressures, new peer groups, new ways of impressing and making networks. And it's also the time where people are perhaps going to start experimenting with substances as at the same time perhaps developing a mental health problem. So you'd love to think that unis would want to talk about this as part of pastoral care. But actually quite a lot of schools and unis aren't necessarily that keen, and there are lots of people in the audience today who already do this. There's fears of reputation, there's fears of acknowledging if drug use goes on, maybe that's not good for kind of people wanting to apply. And I think maybe universities and schools are worried that if they talk about drugs honestly, perhaps they are condoning it. And that's just not the case. It shuts the conversation down. And if you're going to help people, you want to encourage people to talk. And as Hannah said, this report came out as a result of a huge amount of work with lots of different experts from different environments that gave one clear message to universities, which was treat university students as adults, be honest with them, and give them access to good quality harm reduction. And there were a number of different case studies that they highlighted, one of which was the Staying Safe programme, which really came out of an idea and a conversation I had with a few people, including Jason Hugh, about 3 or 4 years ago, that students were getting booted out of uni for using drugs, which was ridiculous. And so we went, well, we'll give you an alternative to booting people out. And we spoke to unis and we spoke to people like Hannah, and they went, well, creating a course would be useful. But of course, most students who use drugs don't get caught. So if you're going to do something, create something that is useful for everyone. And in September, version 3 of this course launched. It started off with 24 modules, and then it was 28, and now it's 42 modules. And it covers a lot of other things other than just drugs, because drugs are just one of a number of things young people have got to face as they navigate university life. So there's issues of sexual assault, drink spiking, consent, what to do if you get caught by the police with drugs, issues of sexuality, gender, coercive control, grooming. It's trying to give information to people that isn't just useful if you use drugs, but also if you know people who use drugs or who may be drunk or vulnerable at a party, you know what to do. So I'm going to show you a little show reel from the course now, and then I want to talk at the end just a little bit about a version we've created with parents with the help of Fiona and DSM, because what we've understood is some of the most important conversations about drugs actually go on at home. And before I do that, part of the reason of creating the course was to help students navigate the confusion about even terminology. So many of the drugs that people use today are also medicines, and we live in a society that just says more is better. And one of the key messages throughout the course is that most people who use drugs do so moderately. Why? Because moderation is hugely protective, not just of your health and well-being, but also probably optimizes positive effects of drugs. And actually, that's important to acknowledge. Pleasure is what drives the use of drugs, not harm reduction, however important that is. So I've said the vast majority of people have never used drugs and never will. Why don't people use drugs? Predominantly because they're not interested.
When you're revising for exams, a lot of people often ask, when should I stop using cannabis? So given that it takes about 4 weeks for your cognitive function to recover back to normal levels, we'd recommend really giving yourself a couple of months.
A lot of young people report having amnestic blackouts, and blackouts are gaps in people's memories. They can be partial or complete, and a lot of the time people are not even aware that they were drunk. But you can avoid it by slowing down your drinking. The best nights you have are the ones you want to remember. What's the point in having a blinding night and forgetting it?
And they can change our behaviours to make us feel more sedated and sleepy, or more energetic as well. Now, these psychoactive substances were called legal highs because prior to 2016, some of these drugs were legal.
It can become a problem when we're doing normal daily activities and you wish that you were taking drugs or intoxicated at that point. When you meet your friends, socialise, have a night out, do you have to take substances to have a good time? That should be some kind of warning sign.
Water is not an antidote to MGMA, but having a glass of water every hour is really important.
If you think you've been exposed to HIV, you can usually get PEP from a sexual health service or an A&E department, but you need to do this within 72 hours of exposure. Don't spend that time wondering what to do or searching on the internet. Get to a service now.
Psychedelics tend to affect your perception. They can give you perceptual distortion, can have hallucinations in visual and auditory fields.
But what we do know is many women acquire their drugs through their male partners or male friends. So this leaves women who use drugs and want to take drugs open to forms of abuse, be it physical, financial, coercive control.
When we look at students, a recent study in the UK estimated that around 10.5% of females and 4.8% of males had experienced dating violence or domestic abuse in the past year. So that equates to about 162,000 part or full-time students in the UK, which is a lot of people.
You can go to a reputable vape store where there's a whole range of different e-liquid strengths, and what you can do is start to taper down. And also just try to pick up your vape a little bit less.
Basically, if there's only one thing that I would want you to take away from this entire session, it's if you like getting stoned, for God's sake, don't use tobacco. Find a way of enjoying cannabis without it.
If you're in possession of a prescription medicine, you're able to legally have that if it's for you. If it's not, then you're breaking the law. And similarly, if you were then to look to share that same medication, then you're also going to be breaking the law.
If you go for an ADHD assessment, you are going to get asked about your use of alcohol and other drugs. Why? Because people with ADHD are more likely to use alcohol and other drugs. But also because the use of alcohol and other drugs can actually mask or modify symptoms.
Alcohol plus ketamine increases your risk of developing this thing called ketamine bladder.
And make sure as well, if you are in an emergency situation, that you can always just call an ambulance and don't feel panicked and threatened by the ambulance. They're there to help. Like, they're not gonna tell on you for using drugs. Like, they're not gonna tell your parents, they're not gonna tell the police, you won't get in trouble.
So in order to protect our mates, we need to remember the 3 Ds: distract, delegate, and to be direct.
But there is a beauty and an art to this, and it all comes with safe practice. It's about knowing dosing, it's about making sure the supply of drugs is good, and it's about doing it in safe places with safe times. So if you are going to do it, please check out the modules from this course and make sure you stay safe and look after one another.
It's about being curious, not judgmental.
So as you can see, and I'm not going to put myself on camera, guys. I have a squint and I had my eye injected, and so I'm seeing double as well as having a terribly bloodshot eye. So it's just a bit uncomfortable, but I'm here. So as you see, we've got a whole bunch of amazing experts who aren't just experts in their field, but they're really good communicators. And one of the things that we learned, it was making sure that we curated content that was actually relevant for students. It wasn't what we thought was interesting, it was what they wanted to know. Now, because we were keen to move just beyond alcohol and drugs, we're also kind of reassured that the Office for Students report that came out on addressing sexual assault and misconduct came out. And this kind of tapped into other areas that we were doing. And we had already added in modules on things like coercive control and grooming. And it's one of those areas that people have very little knowledge of where to get to or how to help a friend. And I just want to show a little bit of Gail Kilchrist's clip on this, because these are some of the modules that we are hearing are particularly useful because they're not spoken about elsewhere.
One of the things people often ask me, if it's that bad, why don't you leave? And I'd like you not to ask your friends that question, because there's lots of barriers to leaving an abusive partner, and people stay in abusive relationships for a variety of reasons. It can be hard to leave an abuser, and we know that it takes up to about 7 attempts for people to leave an abusive relationship. And it's quite often the most dangerous time for people when they separate or when they move on to a new relationship. So what should you do if you want to talk to your friend? Well, it's important to give them a safe space, so to give them time to open up. People might not want to talk about their relationship right away, so you might have to try several times, and make sure you're in a sort of safe and quiet space before you do. Make it clear that you won't judge them, and that they need to feel safe enough to be able to open up to you. Tell them that you're worried, so be direct, be supportive, and use non-judgmental language, and respect their decisions.
As I said, the kind of content is all modular. The modules last anywhere between about 3 and 15 minutes, and kind of students are able to basically run through and find whatever kind of topic is of interest to them. And so there are modules that cover things that I guess have been in the press a lot recently, such as nitrous oxide, which has been banned. I'm not convinced that's terribly useful. You can still buy very large canisters, and giving someone a criminal record on top of a peripheral neuropathy or nerve damage, I don't think is a terribly useful thing to do.
So this is a remarkably versatile gas. So this is a bacteriostatic foaming agent, but it's also a really useful anaesthetic. And people get a short buzz, feel tingly, sometimes they feel a little bit giggly and a little bit euphoric. At higher doses, people get confused, disorientated, they can feel sick, they can collapse, they can faint, they can have accidents. Nitrous oxide binds to your haemoglobin more tightly than oxygen, and you can suffocate and die. It can cause chronic irreversible nerve damage. And we had 4% of people who said they had experienced persistent numbness and tingling, pain in their legs, numbness around their tongue or mouth, or had difficulty operating their phone. All of these things are clues to the development of peripheral neuropathy. It's so important. All of these things are totally avoidable by just not taking so much, not taking it so often. If you get some symptoms, go see a doctor.
We've got ones on ketamine, but I'm going to bypass that. We've evaluated it. Manchester University did this as part of an NIHR grant, and 90% of people said it was credible and the information was useful and trustworthy and non-judgmental. But it was a lot of the testimonials for me that reassured us that we'd actually created something that was useful. And everyone talks about non-judgmental, and I think that the feedback we had said that this filled a gap. We weren't preaching to people, we were giving people information that they needed and that was useful. It's kind of GDPR, secure, anonymous and confidential. You can get certificates and all those sorts of things. But I guess the bit I want to finish on was, having spoken to unis and then schools and then Fiona, it was understanding that what you really want to do is have parents empowered to have conversations. And I'm at that age now where if I get phone calls from friends I haven't seen for 20 years, I know it's because their kid's either got a drug problem or is developing ADHD. And some of the things that people I went to school with are saying when they are finding their kids using drugs and what they are doing, drug testing, grounding them, was just terrifying. So with Fiona and a number of other people, we've created StayingSafeParents.com, which is just going through its final edits at the moment. And it basically provides parents with all of the content that we give the uni students, but with additional kind of modules by family therapists and psychologists and Fiona to talk around how do parents help keep their kids safe. So I just want to leave with a 3-minute trailer for this, and then I am going to stop.
In terms of what's in the Staying Safe program for parents, aside from a whole bunch of modules that cover different drugs, what they look like, their effects, their risks, how to reduce risks, what the issues are with kind of policing and the law and sex and consent, and how to have a conversation with your friends who you're worried about and dealing with drug emergencies, there's a whole bunch of other things that are specifically there to help parents. Things like how to have a conversation with your kids about drugs, how not to respond if you think your kid's using drugs, how to keep conversations open, how to keep communication honest and transparent, how to recognize how your own emotional state might influence the way conversations go. We have experts who are psychologists and family therapists who will give you strategies and ideas, and it's about looking at those different bits of advice and thinking which ones of those are relevant for you.
If they were with a friend who was taking that risk, here's some of the stuff that it's really important that they know to help them to keep themselves safe. So that means that they've then got that in their own back pocket as well. But it is also really important that they know how to look out for their friends. Statistically, they are more likely to be the friend of someone using drugs than using drugs themselves. And we know, of course, teenagers are fiercely loyal and get really concerned for their friends and will be the ones in that front line of what's going on as well.
So know where your child is, keep talking together, and if they do intend to use, help them understand how to use them safely.
I analyse reports from coroners regarding drug-related deaths that have happened in the UK. And what we're trying to do is look at the circumstances that led up to these deaths to try and learn how could they have been prevented and how can we stop people dying from a drug-related death in the future.
That's why being aware of why someone is using, exploring the possibility they may be using drugs to self-medicate an underlying condition is so important.
Around half of the young people we asked think that vaping is equally or more harmful than smoking. And these are young people that are actually vaping. Now, the problem we have there is if they think that smoking is as harmful to their health as vaping, then some of these young people might think, I may as well do both. We really need to correct that misperception.
If you're in possession of a prescription medicine, then you're able to legally have that if it's for you. If it's not, then you're breaking the law. And similarly, if you were then to look to share that same medication, then you're also going to be breaking the law.
Early treatment of young people with ADHD with stimulant-based medications reduces the risk of developing adult alcohol and drug problems by at least 50%.
Lots of parents are often doing so much right. You know, there's so many strengths in a family, and it's just holding on to those. But it's also a great resource for learning together and learning alongside each other. And families learning together is such a powerful thing.
My God, I think I actually finished almost exactly on time, which is remarkable. I'm going to stop talking at that point, and yeah, I'm hoping that's useful, but I'm really happy to take any questions along with the panel. But thank you for your patience, and apologies for you having to watch so many more flipping videos of me. There are lots of other people on there other than me, as you've clearly seen, and we will expand our experts as we move on.
Fantastic work, Adam. So interesting, and can't wait to see the parent portal. So thank you so much to our spotlight and our keynote speakers. We've learned so much this afternoon, and I'm very happy to hand over to Nick now, please, to manage the questions.
Yeah, thanks ever so much. Yeah, brilliant presentations. Really, really great to be here and just hear so much valuable and varied information this afternoon from our speakers. And whilst we couldn't hear what Nancy Reagan had to say, again, maybe not a bad thing, we do want to hear what you've got to say. So keep the questions coming within the chat. We've got a few to kick off with. So if it's okay, Hannah, we'll start with one for you, which is there any work done on training drug first aid to minimise risk in universities at the moment that you know about?
Yeah, so I think Tracy did respond to this in the chat as well. It's something that all of our partnerships are kind of actively involved in doing, but obviously that's only 15 universities that we definitely know are doing this. As kind of a few other people have mentioned already, I think Adam specifically said it as well, there's a real hesitancy from universities to kind of acknowledge that their students may take drugs to start with. So quite often that information isn't disseminated. But we have seen really incredible work on some campuses looking at bringing things like naloxone into halls of residence, training their student staff members, their security staff, the people who are there 24/7. We've also seen initiatives outside of the Drug and Alcohol Impact Programme that looked at training kind of all nursing students in naloxone. So there is work around kind of like drug emergencies and drug first aid happening. But sadly, it's not as consistent as we see And from like my wider perspective, I really feel like quite often it is students doing that work and teaching each other and giving them that information. But it's definitely picking up on campuses, but it's not everywhere yet.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know we've been speaking recently, Hannah, and my experience of kind of working with universities in the last 6 months has been a struggle, but somewhat positive. And I had my first students take home naloxone last week, who turned up at the drop-in, which was a really positive moment. So my message around kind of what Hannah said there is a lot of it, as we know in the harm reduction game or in the drug education game, is kind of getting out there and making yourself visible and just seeing what you can really kind of move forward with. Another question for you, Hannah, was in terms of the SOS Drug and Alcohol Survey, what age range does this cover? And is it just for university students, or could people be filling this out with school and college students as well?
That's a really good question. I think, Tracy, hopefully you're still here so you can correct me in comments if I'm wrong, sorry. We have had responses from kind of the 16 to 18 age group, just because one of our partnerships does have kind of a HE and an FE element to it. But I don't think we actively advertise the survey at the moment as being kind of open to that sort of FE and college group, purely mostly because we just don't have the capacity at the moment in our research team. That would be a huge amount. Yeah, Tracy's come in to say the survey is 16 plus. But I think this year we've worked really hard to kind of, I mean, Nick, you've been on the receiving end of my emails, and I know a few other people on the call have as well, in terms of pushing our work wider into the sector. So if anyone's kind of interested in promoting that, please do get in touch. We can share the resources with you, and we can also kind of make sure you're looped into that conversation. But yeah, it's 16 plus at the moment.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. One that's just come in now. Hannah, do you have any contacts regarding naloxone or anyone else trying to bring up the conversation at university? And are university students taking heroin?
Two very good and related questions. I'm going to start with are university students taking heroin? I think it's really important that we remember university students are part of the wider population. They're not an isolated group that's kind of homogenous. There will inevitably be students using any and all types of drugs. Students aren't just necessarily that 18-year-old age group who we see going out and partying in September. We have mature students and students at very different points of their lives kind of accessing education. So I don't have specific statistics on university students taking heroin, but it's not kind of an unheard of, impossible event. And I think that's one of the really important pieces of our work as well, is making sure people know, you know, university students are such a wide ranging group. It is a really broad spectrum of what students do engage in. That being said, it's not obviously the norm. It's not the kind of majority of the population that we work with. But I think that is kind of the same with the wider population. Mm-hmm. Thinking about naloxone, so this kind of scheme of work has really amped up in the last couple of months, I think, especially with kind of the issues and concerns around contaminants in the drug markets. So obviously, although the naloxone piece isn't specifically for students who are intending to use an opiate, we have seen kind of more concerns being raised. In terms of who the contacts would be, I'm not sure, I don't think I saw your introduction, so I'm sorry, I don't know which uni you're at, but we've seen a lot of kind of positive conversation between universities working in partnership with their kind of wider drug and alcohol sector in their local area, be that a city. So like Nick just mentioned, the We Are With You service, where he works with their local universities. So I would recommend kind of having conversations across the local area. There will be kind of safety boards and drug and alcohol partnership boards and all sorts where you can kind of make those connections, and would highly recommend kind of trying to embed yourself in those places if possible. But if you wanted to drop us an email, we can try and, you know, signpost a little bit more if that's helpful.
Yeah, fantastic answer, Hannah. And obviously, I think, well, certainly in the example of giving out naloxone recently to students, they were really just wanting to be aware and wanting to be carrying it because of the wider issues in society. So like you were saying, they're not an isolated group, and they're living in cities and they're out in nightlife, etc. So Yeah, super. One for you, Jason. Have you had any input on school drug policies, and could you speak to that for a minute or so, if I can?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Nick. Yes, I have, and this is a perfect question, really, because I'm really keen to do more or work with more schools. I think it's really beneficial. So that there's a policy aspect and design. So taking my experience from policing, we worked very closely with the Department for Education within local authorities to get over that hurdle of reputational risk and develop a very much more pragmatic, empathetic policy. We do need to reduce school exclusions. Schools will need help to write that within a policy sense. So yes, 100%. Please get in touch, and I will definitely help. There's also a piece that Hannah touched upon, and a question about the confidence of PSHE teachers or teaching staff and the delivery of these modules, and that is also an area of where I can help alongside colleagues here increase confidence amongst teaching staff around the delivery of this subject matter. And I think it's well and good talking about ketamine, but actually talking about ketamine use and nitrous oxide in a way that doesn't produce fear, or it will creep into that just say no narrative. I think it's really crucial to get the messaging exactly right to engage the audience, but also instill confidence with the teaching staff and parents. Just to finish off, sorry, I know I'm hijacking this question a bit, but it also leads into the confidence of parents too. Often I deliver a drug and alcohol awareness session for students, but that leads on then to curiosity with parents. They come back and ask for a separate session for themselves. So yeah, we're not neglecting another audience, if that makes sense. But yeah, 100%, please get in touch.
Fantastic, Jason. And I know you've curtailed your answer massively there. And you could talk about trauma-informed policy all day, I'm sure. I will definitely be in touch. Thanks ever so much. Other big question you had was, what's the number? What's the number? And I know we're going to push people to your website and include that in all of our comms, kind of moving on for your great projects there. Renato, one question for you, really. The research that you were speaking to is a few years removed. Where could speaking to dealers go in the future? And my kind of caveat to this, in terms of how we could use dealers to promote harm reduction or education for students, is the DEA are currently using Reddit comments as their main evidence to be trying to ban DOC and DOI. And what are your thoughts on that, if you could give us 1 minute on that?
Yeah. I'm not sure I can give you a minute, because basically I just think that's not very helpful, really. Yeah, but I think there are ways and means with end-to-end encryption. You've got messaging apps now, of course, taking over from the dark web, and I think it's possible, and I think it's useful to try and contact this group, because they are the one group that no one contacts, no one talks to, and yet they are they're the front of house, really, in terms of all this market, this huge market that we've got. I think we're missing a trick. So yeah. Sorry, that's not a minute, Nicholas, but
That's a good answer.
And I think there's opportunities.
I think it speaks to the inclusivity of people who use drugs, whether they're selling them or not, and also that social dealing model that we all know exists in the UK.
That's it.
Pretty much every single substance, right? It's very rare that things are bought in isolation, and therefore do we exclude people due to the criminality, etc. And this kind of reoccurring circle that we find ourselves.
There's just this kind of very clear demarcation in people's minds that the drug users are vulnerable and drug dealers are evil, and often those two people are the same person. So we just need to be aware, I think, of our of all of that.
Moralizing people's roles in all of this, actually, in a health issue, health kind of conversation, right?
Nice one.
Thanks, Renato. Really appreciate it. Adam, a few for you. A couple of questions around the resource and the cost to it, if it's available to share or recommend to students, and whether young people and parents can access independently outside of universities, if you wouldn't mind.
So the Staying Safe Parents course, we're going to pilot with a couple of schools, but once it's launched, yeah, individual parents will be able to kind of like, access that and buy a license for themselves, and 10% of the revenue goes to the DSM Foundation. For the unis and various other groups we're looking for who use the kind of Staying Safe University course, those people basically get a license for the uni, and that gives unlimited access to all of their students. But the feedback we're getting from some of the unis is it's also being used a lot by actually the staff, kind of academic kind of staff within various courses, because it's useful if you're a medical student or a nursing student, but also the staff who work within mental health. So they have access to kind of everything. Just to the point about the dealing bit, I've got some colleagues in Amsterdam, and recently a network of street cocaine dealers in Amsterdam were selling their wraps of cocaine and MGMA with the kind of information for one of the big kind of like Dutch harm reduction services. And that led to a media uproar when they went back to the uni going, well, this is terrible. And of course, the harm reduction service went, no, that's absolutely amazing. So of course, the other approach we all could do, and I'd be really happy, is it'd be fantastic. Ask Frank has a QR code. You just say to dealers, you know what? Wrap your deals of Coke and Coke in a QR code for Ask Frank or DSM or Global Drug Survey or Crew or Loop. You know what? Drug dealers could be doing that. And personally, if I was buying drugs off someone who was more interested in looking after my health and well-being, I think that would be quite a good marketing ploy. So, anyway, I got sidetracked because it is a myth. The people who the most trusted source of information around drugs are your mates or the people that you're buying drugs off because you think you trust them. So we could leverage off that. The other bit I will say is just on the back of listening to this conversation, we have a whole series of modules on dealing with drug emergencies, and actually there shouldn't be a financial barrier to anybody accessing that at all. So actually what I'll do is I'll get those modules kind of up on the Staying Safe website, and I'll also give them to DSM. So those will actually be freely available for everyone to use. Like the idea there's any financial barrier to accessing information at all, I'm not comfortable with. And all the stuff we create with Global Drug Survey was free. It's just if you're going to make stuff sustainable, you've got to find a way of paying for it. But that's kind of my little light bulb going, why would you? Yeah, so we'll put those modules up, and that addresses K-hole, too much MDMA, bad trip, drunk recovery position, and really stressing, call an ambulance. You know what? If the police turn up, they are not there to arrest you. They are there to protect the paramedics, and reducing that fear for calling for help is really important, because most people will overdose in the presence of someone else, and they don't call an ambulance because they're worried they'll get into trouble. So getting that message across is really important.
100%.
Sorry, I didn't answer your question at all. I just rambled. Sorry.
No, 100%. And on behalf of everyone here and everyone who will no doubt access those videos that you've just taken the paywall away from for all the reasons that you described, thank you ever so much, Adam. That's they're going to be extremely well received, I know, just from looking in the comments to today. And kind of to follow up on that, Kirsty Blenkins would like to ask you about your view on the use of digital interventions, and I guess how they've developed over the past five or so years since you've been involved in this project. What's your view on using digital interventions rather than face-to-face?
They're cheaper, they can be scaled up, they allow anonymity, they do not replace face to face, they complement, and that is so important, because if you put out the government, here is something that is digitalized, cheap and scalable, funding in people doing assessments, addressing comorbidities and giving that individual connectedness, they will just pull funding away. So it is another way of engaging a group of people who basically don't engage. You know, the vast majority of people who've got drug dependence and alcohol dependence in the UK are not in treatment. The vast majority of people who have problems do not seek help. And part of that is fear, stigma, those barriers. If people can access something online that allows them to raise their own self-awareness of their risk, they've got a problem, then kind of takes them down a path of maybe simple harm reduction, and they sort it out themselves, that's great. If it then flags them as actually, no, you need to get help, that's really useful. What I would say is the current state of funding for the majority of drug and alcohol services in the UK, they're funded for basically alcohol, crack and heroin. And the reality is, if you've got a powder coke problem, you've got a problem with ketamine, GHB, whatever, there will be some scattered services across the UK, but we don't have enough skilled staff that understand that broader area of drug use that basically doesn't lead to overdose death and criminality. And so we need to be much wider in our offering. And a lot of the time that's about encouraging people to moderate or not use, and to get mental health services to go, of course you can assess someone who uses drugs, because they just put their hand up and go, ooh, no, come back to us when you stop using drugs. That is not helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points, well made. And one last question to the panel was, where can we find more information on the risk of factors associated with drugs and neurodiversity? For anyone who's...
Ooh, well, there are, of course, modules on the Staying Safe program that talk about that. There's, I mean, look, Attitude Mag is a really nice free resource for people that have got kind of neurodiversity. There's also a couple of really good, I mean, if people email me, there's been a couple of really good review papers that have come out recently. I mean, the biggest issue is untreated. It is a risk factor for using substances and making a much more rapid transition to dependent use. But the problem is then your chance of getting treated, and I see this in prison all the time, is someone will go, well, you use heroin and crack, you may have ADHD, but we're not going to treat you. So it is early diagnosis and assessment of people, preferably before the age of 14. That's where you can improve their trajectory, because it's also about involvement in deviant peer groups. ADHD people are much more likely to kind of drop out and get engaged with those groups. And once someone with ADHD is engaged with a deviant peer group, it's much harder to pull them back. So if people want to email me, there are some really nice references. But you know, if you go into any school and you ask a secondary school teacher or a primary school teacher, who are the kids here who are going to end up in jail or using drugs, they will tell you. And very rarely will anybody do anything until they've either bumped into Jason in a previous life when he's nicked them, or they see me in prison. Like, we don't intervene early, although that's the best outcome for the individual, society, and for the economy. It's depressing, isn't it?
You're speaking our language, though, Adam. You're preaching to the choir. And
I know.
I'd just like to thank you all so much for brilliant spotlights, brilliant keynotes. Really, really enjoyed today. Thank you all so much. And I'm going to hand over to Mr. Paul North for our closing comments.
Cheers, Nick. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul. I'm the director at VaultFast, and I'm also on the steering committee for the Drug Education Forum. I also just opened a podcast studio, hence the background. Just a few things before we finish up. First of all, thanks again to our wonderful speakers, but also thanks to all of you that attended today. You know, you're the reason that we're holding these events. You were the reason that we've put so much time and effort and energy into getting things to where they are now, and we hope that you share our vision to reduce drug-related harm through sensible, evidence-based drugs education. Well, I assume you do because you've all attended, so that's a good start. So a few bits of news and next steps. The next meeting will be in March 2025. We don't have an exact date yet, but we will get an exact date, and we'll confirm that through email and social channels, so keep an eye out on those. The keynote speaker will be announced in the next few weeks, but what we can confirm for now is we've got two academics from Liverpool John Moores University. We've got Dr. Karen Corteen and Dr. Cassie Rhodes. We've also got Steve Duffy, and the three of them are going to be talking about the Choose Life project and talking about the impact that that's had on pupils aged 12 to 14 years in schools across England. If any of you would like to submit an application for future events, or you just have any speaker suggestions, you can complete a Google form which will be appearing in the chat. So any ideas, or if you've got something you'd like to share, please complete the form. Also, as Fiona said at the beginning, do let us know how the Drug Education Forum can help your organisations. You know, we've got some great ideas, we've got some really good concepts for what we can offer, but your feedback and your direction is invaluable. So please let us know. There's another form that will be appearing in the chat that you can complete, and there's a question, I think it's a 6th question, which just gives you a great opportunity to tell us what you would like from the forum. So please take some time to fill that out. It will be very, very beneficial to us and to you, because it will improve what we can offer you. What we'll be doing next is we're going to be holding some breakout rooms. So if you'd like to stay and talk to other attendees about the work that you're doing and just learn from the people that have attended the group, then please stay. We'll be automatically allocating them. Sam's going to be doing that in the background. Stay for as long as you want. Well, I'm sure within reason. I'm sure there will be a cut-off time. You probably can't spend the whole evening talking, but do if you want to meet other people that have attended here today and network for a bit and share what you're up to, please stay. That'll all be managed on our end. And yeah, thanks again to all our speakers. Thanks for attending. Thanks to the rest of the Drug Education Forum that make this happen. And please make sure you follow us offline to find out what we're up to next and complete the forms. So without further ado, I'll close things up. Please hang around if you want to be part of those breakout rooms, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks, everyone.